Microsoft Arizona 204 exam practice questions with explanations are available in the video for you to study. You develop applications that integrate with a Microsoft Entra tenant. You plan to implement a permission classification in the tenant. You need to select permissions to include in your classification. Which permissions should you select? A. Delegated permissions that require only user consent. B. Delegated permissions that require admin consent. C. App-only access permissions that require only user consent. D. App-only access permissions that require admin consent. The answer is B. Permission classification typically focuses on app-only access permissions that require admin consent, because these types of permissions are powerful. App-only permissions allow apps to act independently of a signed-in user, which poses a greater security risk. Administrative in nature. Since they can perform operations across the tenant without user context, they must be tightly controlled. Require admin consent. These permissions usually affect organizational data and configurations, so only admins can grant them. Including D in your permission classification ensures you are evaluating the most sensitive and high-privilege permissions, which is crucial for maintaining a secure and compliant Microsoft Entra, Azure AD, environment. You have an Azure subscription that contains an Application Insights resource named All and an Azure App Service web app named Apple. You create a standard availability test in AM. You set its URL to point to App 1. You need to ensure that any failed tests generate email notifications to the owners of the subscription. What should you do? A. Enable the test. B. Create an alert rule. C. Create an action group. D. Enable the alert. The answer is B. To receive email notifications when an Application Insights availability test fails, you need to configure an alert rule. Here's how the process works. Availability test, already set up, continuously tests your app's endpoint, App 1 in this case. When a test fails, Application Insights logs telemetry. You must create an alert rule to monitor this telemetry and trigger actions, such as sending emails. The alert rule can then be linked to an action group to define what action to take, e.g., send an email to subscription owners. You manage an Azure Cosmos DB for a NoSQL API account named Account 1. The account contains a database named DB1, which contains a container named Container1. You configure account with a session consistency level. You plan to develop an application named Apple that will access Container1. Individual instances of Apple must perform reads and writes. Apple must allow multiple nodes to participate in the same session. You need to configure an object to share the session token between the nodes. Which object should you use? A. Request options. B. Feed options. C. Connection policy. D. Document response. The answer is A. To share the session token between multiple nodes of your application, Apple, when using Azure Cosmos DB with session consistency, you must attach the session token to each request. This is done through the Request Options object. What is session consistency? Azure Cosmos DB's session consistency ensures monotonic reads and read-your-writes within a session. This works by using a session token to maintain the context of the session across requests. By default, this token is kept per client, but if your app runs on multiple nodes, you need to manually share the token across those nodes. The Request Options object lets you set the session token manually. By capturing the token from a response and applying it to future requests using Request Options, you can simulate a shared session across nodes. This enables consistency even when requests are distributed. You are developing a microservice to run on Azure Container Apps for a company. External HTTP ingress traffic has been enabled. The company requires that updates to the microservice must not cause downtime. You need to deploy an update to the microservice. What should you do? A. Enable multiple revision mode. B. Use a private container registry and single image for all containers. C. Use multiple environments for each container. D. Enable single revision mode. E. Use a single environment for all containers. The answer is A. To deploy updates without causing downtime in Azure Container Apps, you should enable multiple revision mode. What is multiple revision mode? Azure Container Apps supports revisions, which are versions of your app. By default, it uses single revision mode, which replaces the running revision with a new one. This can cause downtime. Multiple revision mode allows multiple versions, revisions, of your app to run side by side. Safe rollout and testing of a new revision before fully routing traffic. Gradual traffic shifting, e.g., 90% to old version, 10% to new version. This enables zero downtime deployments, a key requirement in your scenario. You have an Azure Queue storage named Queue. You plan to develop code that will process messages in Queue. You need to implement a queue operation to set the visibility timeout value of individual messages in queue. Which two operations can you use? Each correct answer presents a complete solution. Note: each correct selection is worth 1 point. A. Peek at a message in the queue. B. Update a message in the queue. C. Delete a message in the queue. D. Receive a message from the queue. E. Add a message to the queue. Or T. The answer is BD. To set or modify the visibility timeout of an individual message in Azure Queue Storage, you can use the following operations. B. Update a message in the queue. You can update the visibility timeout of a specific message by using the update message operation. This allows you to extend how long the message remains invisible to other consumers. D. Receive a message from the queue. When you use the receive message operation, you can specify a visibility timeout. This controls how long the message stays hidden after being retrieved before it becomes visible again to other receivers. You are building a loyalty program for a major snack producer. When customers buy a snack at any of 100 participating retailers, the event is recorded in Azure Event Hub. Each retailer is given a unique identifier that is used as the primary identifier for the loyalty program. Retailers must be able to be added or removed at any time. Retailers must only be able to record sales for themselves. You need to ensure that retailers can record sales. What should you do? A. Use publisher policies for retailers. B. Define a namespace for each retailer. C. Create a partition for each retailer. The answer is A. To allow each retailer to send events to Azure Event Hub securely and independently, while also meeting the requirement that retailers can only record their own sales. Retailers can be added or removed dynamically. The system should scale to 100 plus retailers. You should use publisher policies. You develop an Azure App Service web app and deploy to a production environment. You enable application insights for the web app. The web app is throwing multiple exceptions in the environment. You need to examine the state of the source code and variables when the exceptions are thrown. Which application insights feature should you configure? A. Smart detection. B. Snapshot debugger. C. Standard test. D. Profiler. The answer is B. To examine the state of the source code and variables when exceptions are thrown in your Azure App Service web app, you should configure Snapshot debugger. What is Snapshot debugger? It captures a snapshot of your application's state, variables, call stack, etc., when an exception occurs. You can inspect local variables, the exact line of code that caused the exception, the full stack trace. It works in production with minimal performance impact. A company uses an Azure Blob storage for archiving. The company requires that data in the Blob storage is only in the archive tier. You need to ensure data copied to the Blob storage is moved to the archive tier. What should you do? A. Use a put block list operation with a request header of XMIS immutability policy mode. B. Create a lifecycle policy with an action of tier to archive and configure days after modification greater than for 0. C. Use a put blob operation with a request header of XMIS immutability policy UNRJL date. D. Create a lifecycle policy with an action of tier to archive and configure a filter for blobland xmatch. The answer is B. To ensure that data is moved to the archive tier immediately after being uploaded to Azure Blob storage, you should use a lifecycle management policy that targets all new blobs, moves them to the archive tier, does so immediately, 0 days after last modification. This is exactly what the following policy setting does. Action: tier to archive. Condition: days after modification greater than 0. You have 100 Azure Virtual Machines, VMs, with the system assigned managed identity enabled. You need to identify the value of the object ID attribute for each of the identities. Which command should you use? A. As resource show. B. As add signed in user list owned objects. C. As add user show. D. Get as VM. The answer is D. To retrieve the object ID of the system assigned managed identity for each Azure VM, you use Get as VM in Azure PowerShell. This command returns detailed information about the VM, including the identity block where the object ID of the managed identity is located. You have a standard tier instance of Azure Cache for Redis named Redis1 configured with the default settings. You need to configure a max memory policy to increase the amount of cache available for read operations. How should you configure the max memory policy? A. Decrease the value of max memory reserved. B. Increase the value of max memory reserved. C. Set the max memory policy to no eviction. D. Set the max memory policy to volatile LRU. The answer is A. In Azure Cache for Redis, standard tier, the max memory reserved setting specifies how much memory to reserve for non-cache operations like replication, failover, and backup. By default, 250 megabytes of memory is reserved in the standard tier. This memory is not available for read-write operations on the cache. To increase memory available for read operations, you should decrease max memory reserved. This frees up more memory for actual cache usage, especially reads. This is the correct way to optimize memory usage without changing eviction behavior.